Welcome back to Misunderstood Minds, the podcast where we explore the mental health conditions, emotional experiences, and human stories that are often misunderstood, overlooked, or misdiagnosed. I am your host, Wendy Moore. Over the last 2 episodes, we've talked about anxiety and we've talked about overthinking. Today, we're talking about what often happens when the nervous system becomes exhausted. Not anxiety, not racing thoughts, but numbness. The absence of feeling, or at least the absence of access to feeling. If you've ever said, I know I should feel something, I just don't. Today's episode is for you. People often assume emotional numbness means a lack of caring. In reality, many emotionally numb people care deeply, sometimes too deeply. What has changed is not the presence of emotion, but access to it. The nervous system has learned that feeling everything became too expensive, too overwhelming, too painful. So it adapted. Think about a difficult time in your life. How much emotional energy did it require simply to get through each day? For some people, numbness becomes the nervous system's answer. Most people know about fight and flight, but far fewer understand freeze. Freeze happens when the nervous system determines fighting won't work, running won't work, we need another strategy. Energy decreases, motivation decreases, emotion becomes quieter. Not because emotions disappeared, but because the system shifted into conservation mode. Many emotionally numb adults were highly adaptable children. Children who learned, don't burden people, don't make things harder, handle it yourself. These messages often become survival strategies, and over time, these strategies become identity. The child learns not just what to do, but who to be. There's another possibility we don't talk about enough. Sometimes people become emotionally numb because feeling became dangerous. Not physically dangerous, emotionally dangerous. Perhaps sadness was dismissed. Perhaps anger was punished. Perhaps fear was ignored. Perhaps vulnerability was met with criticism. Over time, the nervous system begins learning a powerful lesson. Don't go there. And eventually, that lesson becomes automatic. The emotional system starts shutting doors before you're even aware they existed. This is one reason many adults tell me, I don't remember much from childhood, or I know things happened, but I don't feel anything about them. The mind may remember, but the emotional connection may have been disconnected years ago. Not because the emotions disappeared, but because the nervous system learned they were unsafe. Think about the family you grew up in. Which emotions were welcome? And which emotions seem to create problems? Sometimes the answer to emotional numbness begins there. Let's return one final time to our inner team. The guard dog, the carrier pigeon, the wise owl. One of the most important distinctions we can make is the difference between peace and numbness, because they can feel surprisingly similar. Both may feel quiet, both may feel calm, both may feel less emotionally intense, but underneath, they're very different experiences. Peace feels connected, numbness feels disconnected. Peace allows access to emotion. Numbness restricts access to emotion. Peace feels flexible. Numbness feels flat. Many people spend years pursuing calm without realizing they've actually become disconnected. The goal of healing isn't emotional silence. The goal is emotional flexibility. The ability to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. When overwhelm becomes chronic, the carrier pigeon begins delivering fewer emotional messages. The wise owl loses information. People often say, "I don't know what I feel." That isn't stubbornness, and it isn't failure. It is often a communication problem within the nervous system. What if not feeling isn't the problem? What if not feeling is evidence that a part of you has been working incredibly hard to survive? Many individuals experiencing emotional numbness also experience alexithymia. This is difficulty identifying emotions, difficulty describing emotions, and difficulty knowing what is happening internally. If you've listened to previous episodes, you may remember that emotions are information. They tell us about needs, boundaries, values, relationships, and safety. Alexithymia doesn't mean someone lacks emotions. Research consistently suggests the emotions are often present. What's missing is the translation. Imagine receiving messages in a language you don't yet understand. The messages arrive, but they don't make sense. That's how many people describe emotional awareness. They notice tension, pressure, restlessness, fatigue, but struggle to identify whether what they're experiencing is sadness, fear, anger, disappointment, or grief. The goal isn't forcing emotions. The goal is learning the language slowly. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" try asking, "What do I notice?" A tight chest, heavy shoulders, warmth, pressure, restlessness. The body often speaks before emotions find words. I often tell clients something that surprises them. Sometimes the most emotionally disconnected person in the room is also the person carrying the most emotional pain. Not because they don't feel, but because they've had to carry those feelings alone for a very long time. And eventually, the nervous system learns to reduce access to what feels overwhelming. And this is where emotional numbness often becomes confusing, because it can look remarkably similar to depression. Less motivation, less energy, less pleasure, less emotional engagement, and sometimes depression is present. But sometimes what we're actually seeing is a nervous system stuck in protection mode. The distinction matters because if emotionally numbness is primarily protective, the intervention may look different. Instead of asking, "How do we make you feel more?" we might ask, "How do we help your nervous system feel safe enough to reconnect?" That shift changes everything. If you've been feeling emotionally numb, please remember this. Numbness is not evidence that you are broken, and it is not evidence that you don't care. Very often, it is evidence that your nervous system has been protecting you for a very long time. Healing doesn't begin by demanding more feeling. It begins by creating enough safety for feeling to return. Thank you for joining me for this 3-part series on anxiety, overthinking, and emotional numbness. If today's episode resonated with you, please follow, rate, and share Misunderstood Minds with someone who may need to hear it. Until next time, remember, sometimes what feels like a symptom is actually a survival strategy. And as always, understanding begins with curiosity.